Perfect. Okay, so we are now recording. If you want to go ahead and take it over, Carl.
There we go. Thank you. Okay, so everything I'm going to take you through tonight was born out of what I'll call a minor career crisis. So, and the fun thing about career crises in larger corporate America, where I came from, is that you're one of the last persons to realize that you're having this. And it started when, after giving a presentation for an annual operating plan of all things, my boss told me this: "Carl, you need to make it sound more like a story." And I looked at him and I said, "Brian, I have no idea what you mean. This is the annual operating plan. It's important, but there's no story here. There's just no story here. I have no idea what you mean." I couldn't wrap my head around it at all. And so he did what any good boss will do, is he got me, in this case, he got me resources. He got me a coach. And the coach and I worked on a lot of things together, including how to give more effective presentations that sound more conversation-like, more story-like. And so everything that I'm going to take you through tonight came from that coach. And the reason that I know that they work and that they're really, like, I don't use the word transformational often, but I use it here, is because I experienced it myself. So when I was at this company, this is the last company I was at before I left and came out on my own and started MarketVisory Group, is every spring I had to give a different presentation. And this was the long-range strategic plan, which on its surface doesn't sound terribly different than an annual operating plan, but it was a big deal. And I had to give it every spring, and I gave it 3 times in my career. The first 2 times I gave it was before I had all this presentation coaching, and the 3rd time was after the coaching. The first 2 times, I got the feedback just that you see on the slide here. Good facts, Carl, you know your stuff, but man, it just needs to sound more engaging, more like a story. And the 3rd time I gave it, after we worked together hard on this presentation, this coach and I, far and away my best presentation ever. And it wasn't like it was the best of 3 bad ones. It was markedly different. I mean, the feedback that I was getting, I really couldn't believe it. I didn't quite expect it. But people were really just very effusive. It was amazing. It was awesome. And I say that just to pull out the contrast from the first 2. And so as I was going through getting trained on all these different techniques that I'm going to walk you through, I never doubted anything that this coach was telling me. He'd done it forever. He's coached a lot of people, and I never had any of it. So I walked into it all willingly. But after I had that experience myself, I became a believer. And since then, I apply these techniques religiously to every new presentation that I give. I apply it to proposals that I give. I often will give a proposal for work using slides, same techniques, because I want to have the same impact. And so I've prepared these slides for you. I know that you're giving a recording, but if anybody wants them, they're almost like a guide, because you won't necessarily remember everything I say. You probably won't remember everything that I say, but the slides, you can have them afterwards. Dalil will figure out a way to get them out if anybody wants them, so that you can apply them yourself. And with that as a backdrop, here's what we're going to cover. I'm going to tell you the one goal that I have for every presentation I do, and for me it doesn't change. For you it might, but for me it does not. How I go about picking a topic, how I then build that presentation, how I practice it, and how I present it. And the preview is, I don't know if you all do this or any of you do this, but I used to get really heavy on bullets, notes, scripting, everything about a slide. I would just agonize over what I wanted to say about each slide. And now I don't do any of that. And life's a lot better and life's a lot easier because of that. I'm going to show you how to do that. So with that, let's get going. My one goal for all presentations for me is always the same. I want to be viewed as the trustworthy authority on marketing and healthcare. My agency, MarketVisory Group, we niched out into healthcare. They're pretty much the only clients we have. They're the only clients we want. And when I give presentations, I like it to be in front of healthcare, independently owned medical practice decision makers, and I want them to feel that about me. If you buy into the idea that people do business with those they know, like, and trust, then a well-delivered presentation can accelerate the whole process of getting to know, like, and trust someone, at least enough to talk to them, better than a lot of other ways can. It's very fast, it can be very personal. Since I've started doing this at MarketVisory Group, I've given 12 or 13 presentations to groups like that. I've gotten 6 clients out of it, 3 of my biggest. I have all of them to this day, 3 more speaking engagements from people who were running other groups and were looking for presenters. And although there are a lot of things that go into it, I'm sure that one of the big reasons is because how I present, what I present. And so that's my only goal. You may have different goal, you have a different type of job, but the point is ultimately, every presentation's gotta have a goal. And it's not only ever about, I need them to understand what I'm presenting about. Part of it's gotta be about you too, because they're choosing you in whatever, they're choosing to believe you, they're choosing to hire you, whatever it is, it's more than just what you're talking about. How I pick a topic, I use these guidelines on the left. The number one thing is I cannot make my audience think hard. You cannot make your audience think hard. They won't do it. Nobody wants to think hard. We have too many things in our lives that we must think hard about. Your presentation cannot be one of them. And that usually forces me to pick a small in scope topic, smaller than I first think I may want to. Because usually for me, when I'm giving a presentation, it's a 30-minute, maybe a 45-minute, there's a confined amount of time. And so my choice is, remember, my goal is I just want them to think I'm really trustworthy at what I'm talking about. I don't expect them to become expert in what I'm talking about. I want them to have a good feeling about me by talking authentically about something I know about. And so it can be a small topic. And even when I'm thinking of the title, I avoid all jargon. Throughout a presentation, throughout a lot of what I do, I'm really always on the hunt for jargon to stamp it out. But even at the beginning with a title. So this example, 2 essential cost-effective pieces of marketing all practices should do. If I wanted to jargon that up, I would say getting started with low-cost SEO and online reputation management, and nobody would have any idea what I meant. And that would be really, really bad for me. So instead, I pick a title that's very plain language that they can relate to. So now I've picked a topic, it's time to start building a presentation. Here is the recipe that I use. I start by building a logic train and using what I call the slide title test. I will show you that. The next part is how I'm going to open it. Very, very important. The first 7 seconds are critical. And the rest are guidelines. 1 message per slide. Use charts, graphs, and tables only when necessary. Not never, but only when necessary. Use build slides only when necessary. Same thing. Make audience participation work. It sounds like a throwaway, but there's more to it, whether you're in person or online. And there's a couple differences depending on the venue. And then simply bank on 1 minute per slide. So let me take you through the recipe, and let's start with the slide title test. What is a slide title test? This is what it is. You answer this question. Would my ideal client with little to no marketing background, but who is otherwise reasonably intelligent, follow the logic of what I'm trying to say if they only had the titles of the slides and nothing else? And the reason for this is because if you can get a pretty clear logic or a very clear logic before you start cooking up slides, then you've figured out the flow. For me, it's logic. That's the word that I use. For you, it might be flow. Whatever it is, it's got to make sense and it's got to be smooth. So how do you do this? You just start writing, right? So you're writing slide titles. This is what I do for every presentation that I'm putting together for the first time, or a presentation that I haven't looked at in a long time. Use complete but simple sentences. At the end of the day, slide titles are not sentences, but you got to start somewhere, and you want to keep them short. That's why I say simple sentences. Don't have a lot of commas and a lot of add-ons. You got to make choices, and you have to constrain yourself, and it starts here. The other constraint is the fewest slide titles necessary. The less time and the less content you can use to explain what you want to explain. Remember, you're talking to an audience who doesn't know what you're talking about. They're there to learn from you about what you're trying to say. So you got to make it easy on them. Simple sentences, fewest slides necessary. Just write them in a list. Just start writing. Sometimes I handwrite. Sometimes I get old school. And then I remember that I can barely read my handwriting and I can type faster, so I move over. But whatever works for you. It's okay if the titles change as you build, that's fine. The whole point of this is to get clear thinking first. For me, the other piece of advice I have is, at least for me, I like to start early. So I will write them out. I'll put them away for a few days, however long it takes for me to completely forget about it. And I'm going to come back and read it again and see if it still makes any sense. And if it doesn't, I've got to revise it. Great writing is about revision. Great presenting, great clear thinking is usually about revision. don't shortchange this step. Make sure that you take this step seriously. And I'll tell you, once you get this step done, you're not building any slides. The worst thing you can do at this point is start to build slides, because inevitably, if you skip over this, if you're anything like me, you're about halfway in, and then you find a flaw, and it ripples back through, and it causes 10 times the amount of work. Just start here first. Here is the set of slide titles for the presentation I'm taking you through right now. And here we are, clean logic. Notice I don't say it the same way, slide title test. That's fine, I know what I mean. This is just for me. And I'm thinking about, would my best client know what I'm talking about? You're probably never gonna have a chance to do that. You're gonna have to have it clear in your own mind, and you are your own audience when you're building this. But you know some people very well who are archetypes of the person that you're trying to convince of whatever it is whatever you're presenting about. Use them to the best of your ability. We talked about keeping presentations simple. I talked about bite-sized topics, smaller than I think, and here they all are, and here's everything else we're gonna go through in our time together. Okay, first 7 seconds. Now we've built the logic, it's time to start building the presentation. So when I was working with this coach, I don't remember what he said about 7 seconds, but he was very precise about 7 seconds, and the reasons that he had were very well research backed. There's researchers that study everything on earth, and there's a good body of them that look at attention spans and how much shorter they're getting. And that's probably not news to anybody listening to this, that we don't really have any attention spans anymore, but there's something magical about 7. I don't want you to take away from this that you need to find some sort of stopwatch and time yourself on your first 7 seconds. The point is, you have practically no time to grab your audience, to want to pay attention to you for the rest of your presentation. There's techniques to grab them, and I'm going to show you one in a couple of slides. You can tell them something extreme, whether it's shocking or amazing, or the other ones that you see here. You can give them a proof point, some piece of data that's relevant to them. You can tell them a quick story, a personal story about you that relates to your presentation. That's what I did. I talked about this career problem that I had, and I hope that it grabbed you enough to say, wow, this guy sounds interesting. I think I'll listen. Even though I signed up to, just because people signed up to listen to you doesn't mean they're going to listen to you. You still have to grab them. And so that was a technique that I chose for this presentation. Obviously, the substance has to be relevant to your audience. Never, the last bullet here, I can't overemphasize this, never, ever, ever use that time to introduce yourself or your topic. It's already been done. Dalil did it for me. And in fact, you're all here because you read the bio and the summary that Dalil advertised out, and you decided to sign up for it. I don't need to spend my 7 seconds telling you what you already know and what Dalil just told you anyway. So just jump right in. If you remember, I just jumped right in, and I just started talking about this career issue that I had and the coach and everything else. And yes, it took longer than 7 seconds, but within the first few seconds or so, I made sure I hit the word career crisis, because that's a word that grabs people's attention. And you can do the same thing with your presentations. Let me now give you an example of what I mean. So this is a title slide for a presentation I give about just what it says about getting reviews online from happy patients for medical practices, that I want to become clients. And I'm going to open it in 2 ways. The first way is the way that we'll call it the traditional way, the way I just told you not to do. And then I'm going to open it up again, a second way, with a good, what I think is a good 7-second grabber. And then I don't know if I'll be able to tell. There's really, maybe you can put in the chat. I'm not even sure if it's possible here, but whatever, I'll ask you afterwards. If the second way felt better, if it felt more interesting. So here we go. First way, just go back to when Dalil introduced me. Thank you very much, Dalil. Yes, everyone, my name is Carl White. My company is MarketVisory Group. We are a specialty marketing agency in healthcare. And I'm going to talk to you tonight about some ways to get more online reviews. It's really the place where I want all of my medical practices to start bolstering their reputation online with more online reviews. And I'm going to have 3 areas in my presentation. The first is general guidelines on getting more reviews online. Then I'm going to switch gears and talk a little bit more specifically about Google. They changed a couple of guidelines a couple of years ago that make it a little, just some new things to look out for. So I'll take you through those, and then I'm going to tell you finally what you need to do to stay compliant with those guidelines now. Okay, so that's the first way, which is kind of, I don't know what you thought of that because I can't see anybody, but nevertheless, that's a sort of a more traditional way. Let me come back and do it again now and give you a more kind of impactful, powerful opening for 7 seconds. Here we go. On April 12th of 2018, Google changed their guidelines with respect to online reviews. And now those guidelines are easier to violate. And if you're caught violating them, Google's going to drop the hammer on you in at least one of 2 ways. First, they might take down all of your reviews on Google. And second, they might take off your Google My Business listing from online so that anybody can find it. And if you're a local medical practice that's trying to get patients within a defined geographic area around your office, that's really painful. And good luck trying to get them back. There's no due process at Google. In my presentation today, I'm going to take you through general guidelines to get more reviews online. Then I'm going to tell you what changed about those Google guidelines, and then finally what you need to do to stay compliant now. That's the second opening. That's the more, what I hope you felt was a more impactful opening. And the other thing to know about this is that this presentation is the same. The slides behind this title slide are the same no matter how I open it. And there are other ways to open it also. But already, hopefully I've grabbed you and I've got your attention and you want to hear more about what I mean by all of that. And you know, are you going to be out of compliance and how can I help you solve that potential problem? So now, let me get into the rest of the recipe. And these are guidelines about when you're putting your presentation together. First up, 1 message per slide. This gets back to the make it easy, don't make them think hard. 1 message because it's less for your audience to follow, which makes it easier for them to understand, which makes it easier for you to present, which makes it easier for you to keep command of the room. And that's really the biggest part. Besides all the easiness for them, it's easier for you as well. And there are a billion distractions, both that you can see in front of your audience members and that you can't see inside their head, but it is really easy to lose them. And one way is to make sure that you make every slide really easy to follow. Okay, next. Here's an example of that. This is about as simple of an example as I can show you. There's just 1 statement. This is plenty okay. I've already done this once in this presentation. I think I've got it 1 or 2 times elsewhere. It's okay to do this because remember, by the time you start building slides, you've got your logic trained down. You've got your slide title test. You've got that box checked. You've got permission to do something even as simple as that. Okay, now next. Charts, graphs, and tables. Use them only when necessary. Why? By their very nature, unless you're careful with them, they make your audience think hard. Most of them have a lot of data going on. They're rich. Sometimes they're even, elegant. There's a lot going on, but that also makes them more complicated and harder to understand for an audience member who doesn't even know that's going to be on a slide. They're also a time suck. You must explain the layout of any one of them before you make the point you're trying to make by having it on the slide in the first place. It's okay to use them. I don't want you to get the impression that you can't, but just use them when they're necessary, when nothing else will do. And let me give you an example of what I mean by how to narrate this. So this is another slide that I use in this presentation about getting more reviews online. You're going to hear me refer to that particular presentation a lot. And so this is a slide, like I said, and let me narrate it for you as if I were presenting it live. And so everybody, what you see on screen is the answer to a question from a study of broad consumer behavior online. This is one of the early questions and the answers. And the question is just what you see. What type of information do you consume as you consider buying a product or service? And below it are the answers. Down the left of this table, of this graph, are all the answers that the respondents gave. And I really just cut out the first 3, as you can see. In total, there were close to 50 answers. So if I try to jam all 50 on a slide, you wouldn't be able to read any of them. But those are the answers. The green bars that go across the right are the percentage response for every answer that was given. And as you can see, the number 1 answer, 81%, say that they read customer reviews and ratings about the product or service that they're trying to consume. So I explained to them what it is. It's a graph. It's got stuff going down the left and stuff going across the right. If it's a table, you've got to say down the left is this and across the top is that. If it's a pie chart, each slice looks like this. Whatever it is, you have to do that work for them because they're going to try to read the graph as you're explaining the graph. So you must narrate it for them. It takes some time, but if it's got a place in your presentation and you need it, use it. Just go through that narration like I showed you. Okay, another one to use only when absolutely necessary are build slides. So a build slide is when you start with like a blank slide or nearly blank slide, and then you hit the next and another image or something else pops up and it's building upon itself. Generally, I just say keep them short. Bad builds tend to drag on. They're usually a sign that the presenter is maybe not sure or clear on what their one message is, or they want to try to jam more than one message in there. Builds can be short, builds can be long. It's just that they've got to, be reinforcing or being explaining of that one message, and then it's okay. Sometimes you want to do it because you have a diverse audience. I'll give you an example of that next. Like I keep saying, it's okay if it's legit that your one message just has a few pieces to make that point. So let me give you an example of a build slide that I use in a different presentation. So yes, it's talking about online reviews in the title. This is a slide that I used in a BNI chapter. So if any of you are familiar with BNI chapters, or if you're a member of one, the way it works is that one member every week gets to give a 10-minute more in-depth kind of overview of, who they are, what they do, what's new with them, whatever it may be. And at my most recent 10-minute, I talked about online reviews. And in this case, I wanted to make the point that in marketing, a lot of marketers tend to take the word that they'll take like some piece of marketing and then stick the word marketing on the end of it. So reviews marketing, email marketing, social media marketing, and on and on and on. And I get kind of wonky about it, but to me, there's one marketing, and those are all tactics. And I wanted to make the point that, don't think of it as reviews marketing as something in competition for your budget or your time from other types of marketing. Truth is, reviews support a lot of other marketing tactics that you use. And so I started with this one, and I said, look, we're all in a referral group, right? So we all believe that referrals are a good way to, give business and get business, but it's a lot easier for all of us. So if I refer Dalil and we're in the same BNI chapter, my referral is going to be even stronger if Dalil has online reviews, because I can guarantee you that the person I just referred to Dalil is going to check Dalil out online, because they can and they will. And if there's reviews, my referral just got that much stronger. And then I moved on to social media. At the time in our BNI chapter, we had a social media specialist. And so I said, Wayne, with your clients, if your clients that you do social media management for had reviews online, would you bake those reviews into your social media content planning? And Wayne would nod his head, yes, I would. See, social media are being helped by your reviews. And then we also have in the group still a guy who does printing and graphic design, but he also does a lot of like direct mail marketing and direct mail campaigns. So I said, Corey, for your clients that you do direct mail campaigns for, would you try to put somewhere on the direct mail pieces a nod to their reviews so that they're, the prospects would go looking for them? And Corey nodded his head. Of course I would. And that's how I made my point, to show that in this case, reviews are much broader than people might think at first glance. So that's an example of a build that I use. And you can make it bigger, you can make it smaller, but that's an example of what, obviously because I built it, but I think it doesn't go too far as a build. Okay, make audience participation work. This is the next one. That's a pretty obvious thing to say, but let me explain what I mean. So by audience participation, I mean, any way that you get the audience involved. It could be a quick game, it could be a survey, leading Q&A. You may have other examples. I use them in some of my presentations, but you've got to use them just with a couple of things in mind. No matter the venue, whether it's online, in person, whatever it is, the activity absolutely must move your topic forward. The activity is there for you to make a point, to prove something, to show something, to make them aware of something, whatever it is. You cannot have anybody wondering why you are asking them to do that activity. It's not allowed. It's going to blow up in your face if you do that. Don't be the one where if you're going to have it, you feel like you have to have an activity so you want them to stand up and stretch. Don't do it. Skip it. Make it something that's meaningful and that it advances your topic. The other thing that I like to do, so I advise other people to do it, is it's almost like contingency planning, right? So assume the worst case. You're going to play this game and nobody's going to participate. Nobody's going to answer the questions. Nobody's going to raise their hand, and be ready for it. Be ready to respond in some way. If you don't, everything falls flat and you've just been labeled uninteresting, in my opinion, by the room, and that's really bad. For example, in this presentation that I'm referring more and more to about reviews, I play a game with them early on. And at one point in the game, I say, all right, so who would you choose, A, B, or C? And I know how it goes. Almost everybody votes for nobody, but a few people vote for a couple. And so I then ask the audience, for anybody who chose A, would you please be willing, would one of you be willing to tell us why? And I want them to answer that question. But it's not the easiest question to answer, and sometimes nobody raises their hand, but enough have in other groups. So I'm ready. So when I gave that presentation in January, nobody raised their hand, and so I was ready for it. And I said, you know, I've run this game in a number of other times, we've given this presentation a number of other times, and here's what those who have voted for A said. Does that resonate with anybody who voted for A? And in that case, that works well enough to get somebody to say something. But even if nobody said anything, I still have enough of a sample to say, look, in a lot of other groups, this is what I found. And then I just kind of keep going. And I believe that that's probably what the people who didn't say anything in January said, because they're just like anybody else. And so I'm sort of placing that bet. But be ready for it. Go to the worst case, just in case. If you're online, the other contingency planning that I can see to have is make sure that your activity can be done even by the most unsavvy tech person ever. So for me, I love her to death, but I picture my mother-in-law. She is not, and that's useful for me in this context because I literally, I will look at something that I'm doing, and there's nothing crazy that I'm thinking that I ever think of doing, but I think, you know, could she get it? Would she be able to, you know, find that button or unmute herself or whatever? And I just kind of ask a couple of those questions just to make sure, because you don't want those things to get in your way when you're giving a presentation. You want it to be smooth. The other caveat I can think to give is that you probably, whatever audience participation you would do maybe live, try to shorten it. You probably have less time online. This is like an educated guess on my part, just because people, you know, they've got to unmute themselves and they've got to find how to do something. And so, you know, just maybe have it be a little less, you know, a little less time. I'm just going to look at the chat here really quick. Oh, I'm just watching people. Okay, cool. I'm going to come back to that. I saw there was a question in there. Let me keep going and then we'll come back to those afterwards if that's okay. All right, so after making audience participation work, last one is, if this will let me go here. Here we go. Bank on 1 minute per slide. Why is that? Generally, it's a good rule of thumb. This doesn't mean that every slide has to be exactly a minute. It's more like an overall average, and please don't time yourself. But just, you know, some slides take less time, some take more. It's just kind of a good way to constrain yourself. And it's pretty easy to do if you only have one message per slide. So generally, you know, with a minute, you've got enough time to say the message, to narrate the slide, explain what you mean, maybe answer a question or two, and then you can move on to the next slide. Typically, you're going to have, you know, a transition slide or two. They take no time. Don't overthink it. It's just a rule of thumb. Okay, so that's the recipe that I use for building a presentation. Then it's on to practicing, and don't undersell practice. But a lot of people spend a lot of time on practicing, so this should be pretty familiar, but I practice a little bit differently. Here's what I do. I start by writing my connectors. I will explain what they mean, but let me tell you this. If you take nothing else away from this presentation tonight, please take connectors away. Nothing turns thinking hard into thinking easier better than connectors. They're almost magical. I am convinced that if I go back to that coaching experience that I had and the third time I gave that presentation, that the #1 reason why my presentation felt more natural and engaging and story-like, above all the other things that I'm talking about here, is because of connectors. They are that good. Never read a slide. You must know your presentation enough where you don't have to read it. You get familiar with the slide sequence, you memorize that, you memorize your connectors, And then for me, what I do is I put it all on a one-pager. I'll show you what that is. It's just a screenshot of slide sorter view, but that's all I walk in with. So let me get into this. What the heck is a connector? Let me tell you what a connector is, but first step back and consider a couple of points. First, remember, each slide is one message, one idea. And there's only one person in the room for any presentation that you're going to give who actually knows what's coming next, and that's you. Nobody else does. They don't know what's coming next. And when you don't know what's coming next in a presentation, it makes thinking a little harder. I could pick any two slides in this presentation that I want, and I could, if I go back, by the way, I've been using connectors for every slide, between every slide tonight. And if I go back and don't do them with connectors, it's going to be a little hard on you. And between any two slides, it's a little micro burst, and maybe it's not so bad. But if you got 20 slides, 30 slides, and they add up, and they just, it's a subtle way of making life harder on your audience. And you don't want to do that. And when you do them, it makes it easier for them than ever. Connecting slides for them, do this work for them, much easier for them. It's simply a preview of what's coming next. That's all it is. It just connects one slide to the next. And you've got some choices. You can do it in the form of questions. You can use a few words. You can read the title of the next slide. You find your own voice. But first, I'll show you what it is in a second. But the first time I did that presentation, the long-range strategic plan, I literally did
Carl,
the same. Yeah.
Your audio changed, and now you sound really far away.
Really?
Yep. I don't know if anyone else is experiencing that.
I didn't change anything. Huh. How about now?
Yes, the same thing happened to me.
Is it any better now?
No. If you want to go to the Zoom screen again, where the black Zoom screen is, if you look at the bottom bar, maybe hit the little caret and try selecting a different microphone. So if you go to where it says mute, there's like a little caret symbol. You can maybe try selecting a different microphone and select the one you were using prior to that.
Now, let me come out of here and then move this. This is funny. So because I'm in.
Your voice is back again now.
Yep.
That's so weird. Still?
Sounds better than prior, yes. I don't know what you did differently.
It sounds better
really
than it was before.
All right, should I just keep going?
Yep, poltergeists.
Yep, I think you're good now.
Okay. All right, so let me do this then. So I was beginning to say something, but I'll skip it. And what I want to do now is I'm going to pick two slides from a presentation I give, the same presentation, and I'm going to do them twice. First without a connector, and then again with a connector, so that you can understand the difference and see what a connector really is. And then at the end, or we'll talk afterwards, hopefully you find that the connector made life easier for you and it made it more interesting, what you saw coming up on the next slide. So first, no connector. So the context for this is a presentation that I give on reviews. I keep saying this, I know, and we're about a third of the way into the presentation. So here we go. And so everyone, not surprisingly, the place where I advise a lot of medical practices to get started when they're trying to bolster their online reputation is just to start with something simple, and that's to make sure that you're posting positive reviews from your already happy patients online. Reviews are really important to patients. People read them a lot. And in fact, they read them more often than they read a lot of other things about what they can find about you online. What you see on screen is the answer to a question in a very broad-ranging consumer study of consumer behavior online. Okay, so I'll stop there because on top of everything else, I've narrated this slide before. But that's an example of you don't know what's coming next. There's no connector. I haven't given you any help at all. So now let's go back and let's do it with a connector, and hopefully you'll feel a difference. And I've actually made it harder for myself, for you all, because you actually know what's coming next. I just showed you. Normally you wouldn't, but that just makes the bar a little bit higher. Hopefully it still works. And so everyone, it's probably not surprising that I'm at this slide by now. The number one place that I advise all medical practices to start when they want to bolster their reputation online is to start with trying to get more positive reviews from their happy patients posted online. Now, here in August 2020, obviously, we know that people check us out online. They have a ton of information to do that with. They can read up so much about us. They can find out so much about us. But it begs the question, where in the hierarchy of information that they can find out about us do reviews rank? Are they really high? Are they in the middle? Are they low? Where are they? Well, it turns out that reviews matter a lot. It turns out that people read reviews about you more than they read just about anything else about you. What you see on screen is the answer to a question of blah, 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 blah. So that's the rest of it. But that's an example of a connector. And that's just one example. There's easily, I mean, the sky's the limit on what you want to do. The first time I did it, I asked a question that the title of the next slide answered. For example, so what's the market share going to be in 2020? Bam, the next slide is market share 2020. It was that simple, but people knew what was coming and it made life a lot easier for them. Okay, home stretch. The other part of how practicing, as I mentioned, a one-pager, here it is. This is the one-pager for the presentation I'm taking you through right now. I just take a screenshot of the slide sorter view, but I know what all these slides are. I know what the message is. I know what the connector is because I write them out on the one that I have, and that's what I walk in with. This shows me the flow. I memorize the connector, and I ditch the scripts. And the reason that I can ditch the scripts is for the following. Here's the reason why. Because I know the one message on every slide, I trust that if I practice it enough, I will narrate it just fine on show day, but it doesn't matter exactly how I narrate it. I'll just do it well enough and then I'll move on to the next slide. In the old world, pre-coaching, I had, I print them out in notes version and I would write stuff out and I would try to be brief, but I never could. And all I did was burden myself with one, a lot more information to try to memorize, and two, constrain myself from saying it any other way. And it doesn't matter. None of that really matters. As long as I narrate the message, the one message of this slide well enough, it doesn't matter the exact words that I use. I'm sure I'll use different words on the day I actually present it compared to the day that I practiced it. It doesn't matter. And once I got rid of all the scripts and I walk in with just something like this, and I've got like the slide sorter view in front of me, or the the presentation mode in front of me also, it's as good as it gets. And I'm telling you, it feels so much easier and so much more natural, because it is easier and more natural, because I'm not holding myself to a specific script that obviously, inevitably, I'm going to mess up if I had a script, and then I'm going to feel bad, and then I'm going to get on top of myself, and we get nervous, and you just wipe all of that away. Okay, so how do I present in person? Few things. I know what the next slide is because I've prepped, just like I said. In a room, I never stand behind a podium. 3/4 of our communication is nonverbal. Don't block your body behind a podium. Let them see everything. I'll move a little bit, but I won't walk around. Moving a little bit's natural. Walking around a lot is distracting. Don't do it. Smile when it's natural. Cover up any perceived physical weaknesses. Turns out if I get really nervous, I sweat a bit. So maybe a second t-shirt, maybe a sweater, maybe a blazer, whatever it is, make it look natural and work on it and fix it. It's too important. My goal is to be seen as a trustworthy authority. I need these things to work. And then lastly, I'll allow myself to look at a slide if I need to explain it to the audience, like that slide that I showed a couple of times with the bar graphs. I'll walk right up on the left-hand side and point to the answers to those questions. But I never want to look back to remind me where I am. I need to know where I am. And if I've got the technology in my one-pager, I always know where I am. Don't ever look back to remind you. If you lose the flow, you lose a little bit of confidence from the audience. If you're doing it online, some things are better and some things aren't. I think maybe the better thing is that I can have my one-pager in front of me, so nobody can really, see me look down if I'm savvy about it. So there's a little bit less to memorize. But the downside is there's no audience to feed off of, right? So I've got to find the enthusiasm inside myself and just kind of, well it up. So if I, in a live presentation, if I tell a joke and they find it funny, it feels great, right? There's a lot of energy to feed. But otherwise, you got to find it on your own. Still smile when it's natural, kill all the background noise where you are, and mute everybody, because unless you're doing an activity and you really need them, and you need them involved. until the end. So that, folks, that's my recipe. That's what I do. That's the presentation religion that I apply to every presentation that I give, you know, for the first time, and that I make sure that I prepare, because, like I said, for me, it's I call it speaking for leads when I give these presentations. At the end of a presentation where I want to be seen as a trustworthy authority, I want them all to come up, right? I want them all to come up afterwards and talk to me about doing business with me. And so this is what I found works for me. So.
Perfect. And before we jump into questions, Carl, I usually stop the recording for the questions component, but I just want to know, how can people get a hold of you? What's the best form of communication?
Email is great. How do we send that out? I probably should have.
Yep, I can send it out, but also for the recording, if anyone's
Oh,
listening to this, how can they get a
yeah,
hold of you? I'll put it in the video description as well, but it's usually good to have it in the recording just in case.
sure. It's white like the color C, at MarketVisory Group, marketvisorygroup.com.
Perfect. Good.